Hello, and welcome to another Redmonk Conversation. A Redmonk Conversation today with Matthias Steiner. He is the Chief Product Officer of Neptune Software, and we're going to be talking about some myths and misconceptions, perhaps, about low code. Neptune is a business that is thriving at the moment. And yeah, Matthias, why don't you say a bit about what you're doing and what your role is?
Yeah, CPO is a fancy title, for an 80-person company. But yeah, so I cover product management with very close interactions with go-to-market communications and product marketing. Of course, engineering. So everything, yeah, just that falls in that intersection is typically running over my desk. So that's about it. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a tight-knit team. I know that. I met a few of you. Why don't you say a bit about the company as a whole? Because we'll get to the low code, but just from the perspective of, I understand you're not a Silicon Valley startup. Like what?
No, no. The company headquarters is in Norway, in Oslo, and the whole thing got started 10 years back. With the idea to bring enterprise mobility closer to the SAP developers. At that time, SAP tried to, address the challenge with acquisitions. And of course, that was a little bit obtrusive to all those ABAP developers because they were told, here's a new tool set, new lifecycle management, new technology, learn it, and that's how you do mobile. And the founders of Neptune just said, hey, there's a better way. We can make it much more native, much more seamless integration into the way and the tool set of ABAP developers. And then it alluded into digital experience with SAP's design system, Fiori and UI5. And then we added API integration and really covering not only SAP, but SAP plus X, which seems to be the norm at most companies. So that's
okay. So yeah, you're I mean, I think there's a couple of things there. I mean, clearly, building in the SAP ecosystem, so you came with a slightly different culture from some of the others in the market. We'll talk a bit about that. So, I think from my perspective in having a conversation about this and in talking to you, as you know, I think I probably began, possibly still have a bit of a sort of a low code kind of skepticism. I do have. I'm always worried that the software developers, and at Redmonk we like to make developers the lens through which we view the world. I always worry that it's the developers that are going to be left cleaning up a mess. If something is built by people that don't really know what they're doing. So that's like my initial. Is that a place to begin? Is that a myth? Is that a misconception?
It totally is, and I'm happy you bring it up right from the get-go. So I would start by saying not all local platforms are created equal. Mm-hmm. And then when I would be talking to you and the people that like you that come with a technical background, I would always say let's forget about low code and no code and just call it component-centric rapid app development. Okay. Because suddenly we have two things. We have the rapid app development, meaning it's all about time to market, time to value. And we have component centricity, which I think all technology people would say that's the right way how you build proper software by, having a modular, reusable components that you then use to accelerate the development process. Governance, and I think that's the other thing that was implied by your statement, that's the most important thing to keep in mind. Because yes, I just imagine what would happen if you have non-traditional software, non-developers creating software. The amount of apps being created will just go insane. And what do we do if we don't have the governance to keep it, in control, keep it manageable? And it would backfire because, the goal really was to make, first of all, professional software engineers more productive. Mm-hmm. Secondly, freeing up some time, and then helping others in the company to also, build little, small, lightweight apps that they need for their day-to-day business. And if suddenly we don't do it properly, and all those internal people suddenly also, asking IT for support, we just, that's the worst thing we want. So you have to do it properly, and yes, governance and central repositories for those building blocks or components. This is the key for success. Yeah.
So there's a couple of things there actually that are worth double clicking on. So one, it's interesting. You mentioned that sort of the SAP history, and technologies like ABAP. Obviously, that's only found in the SAP world. But then, as you began talking about and rapid application development, I quite like the term because it's a term a little bit from the past, and I always think it's time to revisit things like that. But rapid application development and component-based development. I mean, that sounds a bit like where we'd be going with something like React. I mean, what does your stack look like? Are you just about sort of this SAP technology, or are you more of a horizontal technology player today?
Great question. So we have, so Neptune DXP, our platform, comprises out of two environments, or maybe you could call them runtime. The initial one that we created sits embedded within the SAP backend systems. So it's really like completely integrated. It comes with zero footprint from an SAP IT perspective, and it caters to those professional ABAP developers that you mentioned. But as we know, there's a whole bunch of other vendors out there beyond the SAP, and even SAP's portfolio the last 10 years, with the exception being S/4HANA, was driven by acquisition. So from a technology standpoint, it's also non-SAP, right? So how do I combine them? How do I bring them together? And as you said, it's completely two different mindsets. We have the backend developers that have a strong understanding of the business processes, of the workings of an SAP system, but they're not really they never needed to be top cutting edge when it comes to technology. On the other hand, you have whatever you want to call them, the 10X rockstar developer ninjas, like those full stack developers that are very much into technology, but they don't really care a lot about the dull, boring ERP processes. So how do you bring them together? How do you want them to work together? Because typically at the large customers and companies out there, they're pretty divided, right? That they don't really talk to each other a lot. And that's how we think our two platforms can help bridge those things. And our open edition, how we call it, it's Node.js, it's TypeScript, it's heavily influenced by some of the Microsoft tooling. So a full stack developer would feel at home. He's like, yeah, I know that. And the SAP developers, that feel at home with our SAP edition. And suddenly we are bringing them together by saying, hey, we have an open API, standard-based RESTful programming model that they can use to work together. We have a very similar tool set when it comes to providing a digital experience on top. Where the graphical modeling, you mentioned React. Yes, we support React development as well, but we also support other design systems such as UI5 and Fiori. We even took Bootstrap and mashed it up with the data binding from UI5. So everybody would feel at home, and they're starting to speak the same lingo, the same vocabulary, and they can work together.
Okay. So, I mean, another question I've got would be, it's kind of interesting there, because you talked about customer experience management or customer experience. Again, maybe it's a misconception, but from my perspective, when you think about low code, maybe sometimes it's those environments that, they'll do the job, but it doesn't really feel like a design environment. There's no design system. It's not, it's not built that way. And yet, what about it? Yeah, like, is that something you agree with? Or, what does it look like in your customers? Where does this design sensibility come in?
It's about components, right? So all the way from the backend integration, where you have such things as API definitions that you could call a connector. You have maybe local data sets that you're storing in the database that comes along with it. You may have Excel sheets, Google Docs, SurveyMonkey backend points, analytic backend points. So you're abstracting from the data source via abstractions. Then you can, as I said, extend our capabilities with NPM modules to just bring in, I don't know, sentiment analysis, and all these type of things, image recognition. And then you have, a design system, an atomic design system, where you can create custom components, page templates, application templates, all branded according to your corporate identity. And you can use them in a drag and drop fashion to create the UI. But you're not locked into that, right? It's at the end of the day, we're just using a graphical interface to make it quicker and easier, but you have the source code, HTML5 source code behind. So you don't have those limitations from first-class no-code tools as well, because you can always augment and complement everything you've done in a low-code fashion with pro code, high code, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Okay. What are your, I mean, so we've said a bit, you mentioned governance, we talked about maybe people that are not professional developers. What do your customers look like? And what do you think, how do you see this landscape? Because low code tooling, whether or not I'm a skeptic, it's becoming definitely part of the IT landscape. What are you seeing in terms of the personae in your customers, and how do you foster interaction between them, the different groups?
So I always go with orange is the new black, of course, meaning, referring to Neptune's primary color. So we have customers in all industries of all sizes. We have the really big ones like Johnson & Johnson, Walmart, and others. And we have small, medium business. It's very strong here in Germany and in the German-speaking regions and in the Nordics. So size doesn't really matter in this regard. As I said, industries doesn't matter. So it's more about verticals, right? And typically it starts there. So often people come to us and say, hey, we're not looking for a strategic local platform, but we're looking for somebody that can help us solve a particular challenge in, let's say, creating an employee portal or creating a supplier portal or inventory management or plant maintenance that needs strong offline capabilities as well. And that's how we start. We do that reasonably well. And then the customer says, I have 2 more challenges. And suddenly they say, hey, seems like you really got something. We want to use Neptune as a strategic development platform. In terms of how they can work together, yes, in simple scenarios, the SAP people can just create full stack applications with their skill set they already have, which goes back to, like Red Monk, like really being at the forefront of saying developers are the new kingmakers. Everybody needs developers. They're hard to get. And if you get some, then they're not really cheap. So why not utilize the in-house expertise you already have? And then as customers expand from, just SAP to SAP plus X scenarios, to integrate with Workday, with Salesforce and all these things, or integrate with custom development that they have done on the hyperscalers. That's where open APIs come in, and where we can say, we can expose everything that you have in your SAP backend system as an open API to interact with. And then you can build composite mashups, whatever you want to call it, with on the open edition stack, and create this beautiful applications and workflows that go all the way from the core backend system to the cloud, including offline.
Okay. I think one of the questions you probe a bit on there, because as I say, you did mention governance, and then who's running the project? Like, who's the customer from that perspective? Is it what part of the business or IT is it? It's
both. Sometimes it's the SAP IT head. Sometimes you have a specific LOB that just says, okay, I want to need a solution, and sometimes you have the chief innovation officers, the chief digital officers, the CIOs, and all that. So it really depends. But where the most interesting cases is where we find somebody that becomes the advocate and whose career is tightly coupled to the success of the project. And we had multiple occasions of that where a person's career just got completely, put on hypergrowth by being the one that can finally be the change agent and start to, as I said, remove those silos in IT, and also remove the silos between IT and LOB. Because if you take a look at DevOps, right, this was the whole idea, was to say, let's forget about separating from development and operations. But what about the business people? Like when we talk microservices and owning a product end to end, the business part is also important. So I think going forward, those teams that are cross-disciplinary, where you have technology people and business people, this will be something I think will take off in a couple of years. We're just at the very beginning, but this is where ultimately Neptune can help, because we can help deliver tangible business impacts at a time when everybody says, I can't wait for, of a return of investment for a 3-year, 4-year project. They said it's mission critical. Either we get some results in, so you need those fast time to market. That is really important that a local platform can bring.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting point in that we're certainly seeing. Well, I don't know. The book by Mick Kirsten, from project to product, and we're definitely beginning to see. I mean, if any successful and sensible digital transformation has as part of it a transition to really thinking about everything in terms of digital products and product ownership, sort of up and down. A really good example. At the Financial Times, where they decided that what they needed to do was because one of the things we've got traditionally in tech, as is sometimes you don't know who owns the thing, right? You've got infrastructure that's running the business, but who's the actual owner? They said, hang on a minute, we're going to do everything in terms of product owners. And if a piece of infrastructure is not identifiably owned by a product owner, we're going to turn it off. And that was part of their microservices journey, where they said, look, we really need this product ownership. So I think that I think that makes a lot of sense. We're seeing a lot of that in organizations today. So Matthias, I'm not sure we've probed enough misconceptions. I've said a couple of things that I think that might be seen. What are some key sort of misconceptions that you'd like to address? Things that maybe they annoy you a bit when you're reading it, like, why are they saying this? Or what are some of the things that have got front of mind for you?
Yeah, so we live at the times, where at the one hand side you have this hyperbole, like all the big analyst firms, all the vendors pushing really hard, and then you have a lot of skepticism across the techies. So the first misconception I want to say, no. First of all, low code could definitely also mean making professional developers more productive with a component-centric model. So that's the first thing to understand. So it's not just low code does not automatically mean it's citizen developership. Second, it's different types of application we're talking about, right? And I typically use an analogy saying, hey, if you want to build a house or a skyscraper, by all means, do it with professional workers that know what they're doing. But if it's just about, to build a barn in your backyard or to, repair a kitchen sink, if you have the right tools and if you have some craftsmanship, you can do it by yourself. And this is the type of applications that are typically being addressed with low code. It's not about the priority one things, right? Leave that to the pros. But at the moment, IT is so overloaded, they only get to do priority one. So a lot of the priority two stuff never gets done. And this is where local platforms kick in, really just turning IT departments into application factories, into app factories that can constantly roll out applications for the organization. And that's the thing. It's just a different thing. Yes, software engineering is a craft. You can't put a trained monkey on the job, no matter how sophisticated the tool may be. But there is some stuff that never gets done at the moment. And this is where local platforms, I think, can help. And people need to understand that. Right, so it's about making them more productive, and making it more scalable. And that brings me to the second point. If you want to build with high quality at scale, then a platform is the right approach. And typically this is automotive is used to bring that home, right? Cars, yes, you have different type of cars, but they have a shared platform, shared components. We can produce them at scale and at a high quality. So low code does not mean low quality, the opposite, because as you mentioned, the governance is there. Everybody just gets to use components that have been checked and are governed across non-functional requirements, security, archiving, data privacy, corporate identity. So it's better software, right? And I think those are the top two. And then the third one, and this is maybe also a call to action. I think we always know technology is typically not the issue. It's always culture. And the culture shift that I see at the moment is needed, that IT stops being the delivery unit for software into becoming the enabler of software delivery. And that's where governance kick in. And I think that will also help us produce, not only help prioritize where we should be spend our software spend, but also in making it more tameable, right? Because And now one last thing, when we start talking about citizen developership internally, we build a wizard-based approach, and the headline said, which application do you want to build? And I went back to the team and said, that's already wrong. The question should be, which type of application do you need? Because the fastest way to get the app you need is not to build it yourself, but take one that was already built, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're talking about simple apps like birthday list for middle management, I want to know when my people have birthdays and get a notification a day or two early. I mean, you need one. And if you now be smart about it and apply governance, and somebody starts creating a screen says birthday list that uses an API that goes back to HR, you can do a pattern matching saying, hey, wait a second, we already have an app with that title that consumes the same API. Maybe you need to talk. And at the same time, imagine there's an app somebody built for themselves. They like it, it's useful. They expand into the whole team using it, maybe the whole LOB. And suddenly you see a lot of traction. If you monitor that, IT can go back and say, hey, this seems to be an app that's really gaining traction. Is there anything that we could do, to make it even stronger? And then you have that collaboration and prioritization between citizen developership and professional IT departments. And I think that's where it's really becoming interesting. Are we there yet? No, but I clearly see that this is where we're heading.
Yeah. Okay, you talk about culture change, and I think that's really important. We mentioned the transition to product management focus. You said yourself the sort of the transition we've made from with DevOps, where we're bringing ops and developers together into smaller teams, working more collaboratively. So there's you're saying this will also happen with the business. This is happening with the business. I think one of the questions to my mind is and we've written a bit about this. My colleague Rachel Stevens and I sort of, because quite often we're told that tools can't drive culture change. On the other hand, anytime we've had a culture change in how we do businesses, there have usually been some core tooling associated with that. I mean, think about, you mentioned DevOps. Look at the infrastructure and then, or config as code and then infrastructure as code. It's hard to imagine DevOps without the kind of automation that we've got from platforms like Chef, Puppet, later Ansible, into Terraform and what HashiCorp has done. So how mature are your customers in terms of the culture, and how can you help them without becoming a services company, which you don't want to be? You want to be a product company. Are you under any pressure to help change the culture in your customers, or do you find customers whose culture is already changing and you help to enable them?
Yeah, very good question. I think at the moment everybody is so in survival mode still, that it's hard to really think about that. You can't imagine how many times I hear people saying, yeah, we don't have time and we don't have resources to really look into that, if that's a dangerous road, if you're already if the water is still here and you don't change anything, how do you, if you always keep doing the same things, how do you expect a change? That's not going to happen. Typically, what we see is that it starts organically at the customer side, where we say, we did one project, we do two projects, we do three projects internally, and suddenly they realize, hey, there's something. And then they also get the awareness from top management, hey, suddenly, there is an IT department that we just, put the stigma on just keeping the lights on. And suddenly those are the ones that are doing the innovative stuff, not the cloud center of excellence, not the machine learning center of excellence. It's the old guys that suddenly, propel the business forward. And that's when we at least see the culture change of breaking this divide between back office IT and innovation IT coming together, say, hey, we need to look at this more holistically, because everything we're doing on the innovative side will probably touch a backend system and vice versa. So that's when it starts. And that's when those teams that have worked together, the LOB and the IT team that did it, they were together successful. And that's where it starts. Does it automatically mean they will start reorganizing to become fusion teams or microservices teams? Maybe not immediately, but at least you have those people talking to each other. And from that perspective, I think, it's at the moment with COVID, with the economic downturn, with everything else that's happening in the world, people are still thinking in smaller in smaller dimensions, and not like let's make a big reorg to bring in a different culture. So I think it's something that will drive organically, and go viral from there.
Okay. So I guess maybe to finish up with a bit of a curveball, because and one where you can express a bit of an opinion. So obviously you grew up in this SAP ecosystem. How do you see that changing? And again, from the customer perspective, you mentioned these days there's going to be integration with some of those SaaS systems. Like, how is that still a good place to? Are you reliant on that? Do you see, what's happening in terms of customers in the ecosystem vis-a-vis SAP in 2022?
So just to set this straight, so I'm a little bit special, maybe. Yes, I grew up in SAP land, but for the first 10 years, I was a software architect that worked at the intersection between SAP and open source. So from that perspective, it's just continuation from what I'm doing now.
I sort of meant the company, actually, because Neptune clearly. So it's both. You grew up in it, Neptune grew up in it, but it's
exactly.
It's an ecosystem that is now, it's very mature. So I'm just kind of interested in what are your customers saying we need, new, do we need something different? What's happening in the ecosystem at large that is gonna help or hinder you going forward?
So the SAP ecosystem at large, I think, is primarily on the topic on how and if and when to switch to the new ERP flagship that SAP introduced a while back called S/4HANA, which has underneath an in-memory database and is very sophisticated, very modern architecture. But of course, everybody understands it will be cloud and hybrid scenario. So the question really is, how do I get the people from where they are today, like on-prem, waterfall, very business focused, to go to the cloud where everything is technically much more complex, and how do I get my customers there, and how to and that's where Neptune can help them, because we're quite flexible, as I said, when it comes to deployment models. We can pick up customers where they are today on-prem, work with them on when to go towards a hybrid architecture or cloud architecture, and we can help them work at their pace and at their terms. And as we said, also bring in this expertise that they need from a technology perspective, because it's a very different thing. Back in the SAP days, there was an abstraction layer for SQL. So those people never really had to write, and they don't know what an outer join was, I mean, now I'm exaggerating, of course. And they never needed to know about responsive UI because there was a screen painter. And suddenly you're saying, hey, we have an in-memory database. To really utilize this thing, you need to do a lot of the code savvy stuff. The data crunch needs to be pushed down into the memory layer. And then you have, microservices, cloud native applications, responsiveness, fault tolerant, resilient, and then build a UI5 on top that is responsive and looks good on all things. So it's definitely a much bigger complexity, and Neptune can help with a much lower learning curve compared to many other things.
So there's plenty of opportunity for you in that ecosystem.
Oh yes, yes. Absolutely.
Okay, right. Okay, good. Well, look, I think we've addressed some of these misconceptions. It's been great talking to you, Matthias. Thanks for joining us today. And would love to talk to you again soon. I think you've got some big plans on the horizon. So next time we catch up, maybe we'll talk about that. Good to talk to you. And that's another Red Monk Conversation.